Hey everyone, my name is Suhas, and in this video I will be talking about how to use GitHub Copilot prompts to generate unit tests. We will be generating unit tests for the payroll class using xUnit and GitHub Copilot. We will start with some basic tests, move on to using parameterized tests, and finally cover a few advanced scenarios, including mocking with MOQ. Let's begin. Just before we begin, there are a couple of prerequisites. One would be to have Visual Studio 2022 installed along with a basic understanding of C# and .NET. Also, some familiarity with unit testing framework like xUnit and mocking using MOQ would be highly desirable. Let's quickly review the payroll app class. As we can see, the payroll app class has a few private members and has a constructor. There is a specific dependency on the tax service, which is being injected via the constructor. And the two main methods are the gross pay and the net pay. The gross pay method is a simple multiplication between the hourly rate and the hours worked. Net pay is gross pay minus the tax. All right, let's go ahead and start writing some unit tests for this class. The first thing I'd be doing is going into my solution. I will go ahead and add a new project. I'm going to create a xUnit project. I'll hit next. I'll call this as payroll app.tests and hit next. Let's go ahead and create. So right now we have created a xUnit test project. Let me rename this. I'll call this as payroll tests.cs. Yes, I would like to update the references as well. Before we generate the fact or write the first unit test method, let's go ahead and initialize a few members. We will be testing the payroll class, and we will need to add a reference for it. Let's go ahead and add a project reference for payroll app. Hit OK. Come back here. And let's actually start defining the private payroll. There we go. So GitHub Copilot is already starting to make suggestions. As we can see, we have this small icon here which says that GitHub Copilot is running. That's good. Let's also define the constructor payroll tests and define or initialize the payroll method. And as we see, the first thing we are seeing is the tax service erroring out. That's because there is a dependency on the interface iTax service from the payroll class. The actual implementation of the iTax service is not defined. In this scenario, we will need to use mocking framework like MOQ so that we can unit test just the payroll class without having to really worry about how the tax service is defined. All right, let's go ahead and add a reference to MOQ. I will right click, manage NuGet packages, search for MOQ. There we go, I find it, and I'm gonna hit install. And I believe we have installed it. Yes, we have. Let's go back here and add a using statement to use MOQ. All right, so it's time that we get rid of this tax service and use MOQ to mock this particular object. Let's define that here. Now that we have added a reference to MOQ, let's see if GitHub Copilot picks it up, and it does. I will accept that suggestion and come back down here. And before I go and do that, let's go ahead and create a mock service. And there again, GitHub Copilot is giving me suggestions, which I'm going to accept, making my life a lot easier. And at this point of time, I will delete this and use my tax service mock.object. And with that, my initialization is complete and I'm ready to write my first unit test. And as we can see, GitHub Copilot is already giving me suggestions on what my first unit test could look like, but I know what exactly I want. My first unit test should be on the gross pay method. So I'm going to write a prompt to say unit test for calculate gross pay method, and I also want to call it a fact, and let's see if this works. Yep. So GitHub Copilot came up with a suggestion. Hit tab and I accept it. Expected gross pay is 100. Actual gross pay is payroll.grosspay, and we are doing an assert. So we are following the pattern. So of using arrange, act, and assert. GitHub Copilot actually came up with that suggestion, so which is pretty good. So at this point of time, let's go ahead and quickly test it out to make sure that it is working as expected. Let's open up Test Explorer and hit run all tests. We just have one test, which is calculate gross pay, and let's see what happens. Okay, it has found one test, and there we go. It has our first unit test that we have written using GitHub Copilot has passed. Let's go ahead and write a few additional tests. As we can see, GitHub Copilot is also giving a suggestion for writing a comment, and that comment is to create a unit test for calculate net pay. I would like to hold on to that for now and actually go ahead and write a parameterized unit test for the gross pay itself. So what I'm going to do is I will say unit, or I will say write a parameterized unit test for not the net pay method, but the gross pay method. So we are again giving the right set of prompts so that GitHub Copilot can give us right suggestions based on what we want to do. All right, let's look at it. So we define it as a theory. Excellent. Inline data, perfect. Another set of data, that's perfect. Yeah, this is looking good. Probably I'll just change it a little bit. I will say, I'm paying $20 for 40 hours, and that should be a gross wage of $800. And let's see if this works. And there we go. GitHub Copilot actually made a suggestion to calculate and test gross pay, except that it has used the same name. So we will we can just go ahead and check or change this name to say with something like with varying inputs. All right, and let's try this out again. And as we can see, we have 4 unit tests. The second unit test is basically set of 3 different data sets that we are passing. And all of these are passing as well. The unit test that we wrote rather quickly using GitHub Copilot has passed. All right, again, just before we move on to calculate net pay method, let us go ahead and write a negative unit test. So write a negative unit test for pay method using a negative hourly rate. We know that negative hourly rates is not a valid scenario, but yeah, we really want to test our payroll class. So let's go ahead and hit enter. It's a fact, yes. All right, as we can see, it is initializing a new payroll with a -10, and it is doing an assert equal. It is expecting it to be 0. And let's see what happens at this point of time. And our unit test has just failed. Let's look at why it has failed. The reason is because we are not handling the negative scenario. Our unit test has uncovered a problem with our class. So let's go ahead and fix it, right? So when we are initializing the payroll, we also want to ensure that the hourly rate defined is not negative. So let's go ahead and hit enter and try typing an if condition to validate it. And there we go. The moment I type if it automatically is giving a suggestion, GitHub Copilot, of handling this negative scenario, and I will accept it, which is fine. And at this point of time, let's go back to our test and regenerate this test, which would be handling that negative unit test. Fact, hit enter. All right, this point of time, I'll go ahead and accept it and if I were to hit run, I actually see a small issue here in the way it has generated. The problem is we are going and creating the new payroll here, and the exception is being thrown at the time of arrange. So we'll need to kind of change this arrange a little bit, reorganize it a little bit, and as part of my act and assert, we will create the new payroll later. So I'm gonna just take this and move it outside. So let's gently nudge GitHub Copilot to go ahead and initialize my variables first instead of creating my new payroll. What I really need it to do is define my variables. Excellent. Hourly rate is -10, hours worked is 10, that's my negative, and hopefully it can give me a recommendation on my mocking object. If not, I can always go ahead and copy it from above, which is my service mock. I can actually, I'll try using that same mock. Okay, and here yep, this looks much better, and let's give this a go. Hopefully it is going to be able to catch the exception. Yeah, and yes, it did. So this is looking good. All right, finally, let's go ahead and write a unit test for calculate net pay method, the one that GitHub Copilot has been waiting for us. I'll hit enter. It's a fact. Brilliant. And I accept the suggestion, which is basically using my tax service mock. So it is setting up the interface. Of course, we don't have that defined, but it is actually doing it for us. Everything is set up. It is looking good. And let's hit run all unit tests and observe what happens now. Perfect. So our calculate net pay method also has worked. Let's assume, this has been created, but I'm kind of struggling to really understand how this works. So what I can do is I can actually go ahead and ask Copilot as to what this is. And by using the / command, explain. So this is GitHub Copilot chat, not GitHub Copilot auto completion. So let me see what it does when I ask it to explain it. Brilliant. It says the selected code is a test class named payrolls test in the payrolls test namespace. Okay. And let's try and understand what specifically is the net pay doing for me. Okay. Calculate gross pay with varying inputs, net pay. Okay. So this unit test verifies the correctness of calculate net pay method of the payroll class. It does this by setting up the behavior of the tax service mock object to return fixed tax value of 10 when the calculate tax method is called. It then compares the expected net pay value 90 with the actual net pay value obtained from the calculate net pay method of the payroll object. Excellent. So not only did I write all my unit tests, it also GitHub Copilot chat also helped me understand what I had actually written. Perfect. So yeah, this is it. Thank you so much, everyone. Just to conclude, we saw how we successfully set up and generated unit tests for the payroll class using xUnit and GitHub Copilot, including looking at the parameterized tests and some advanced scenarios using MOQ for mocking dependencies. Thanks, everybody.